All right. Can everybody hear me? All right, good. Well, this is the last session for today, so I appreciate those of you who hung in with us here to the bitter end. But we're going to be wrapping it up with today's session and really talking about transportation, trends in the industry as it relates to freight and logistics. I mean, we talk about supply chain here, and of course, freight transportation has a pretty big factor that plays into the entire supply chain. So I'm going to have the three gentlemen here introduce themselves. We have Gene Maher from General Manager of VP Logistics. They're an asset-based transportation carrier. Blake Sauls, Vice President of Business Development for Kane is Able, which is a 3PL. And then Ryan Schreiber for Director of Engagement CarrierDirect, which I'll let these guys tell you a little bit about what they do and a little bit of their background. So, Ryan, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Ryan Schreiber, Director of Engagement for CarrierDirect. We're a management consulting and technology delivery company that focuses exclusively on transportation and freight. So we basically do traditional management consulting, process improvement, things like that, technology strategy, 3 to 5 year technology strategies, frameworks for making buy versus build decisions, and then organizational changes that maybe need to go along with that when you implement a new piece of software, and then proprietary software development. Like I said, we work exclusively in transportation. So that's trucking companies, 3PLs, 4PLs, brokerages, technology companies that serve the space, and then to a little bit of a lesser extent, shippers.
My name is Gene Maher. I'm the General Manager of VP Logistics. VP Logistics is a top 125 sized brokerage. Also have an asset piece to our business, so we do both assets and brokerage. We grew out of Visual Pack, who's a contract manufacturer, one of the members here, so we kind of have that perspective as well. So we kind of see the whole, transportation side of things from all the different sides, and excited to be here.
Yeah, Blake Sauls, Vice President of Business Development with Kane. Kane is a what I'd call a mid-market third-party logistics provider. So we're performing, all the fulfillment, distribution services, transportation, as well as contract packaging and manufacturing. Right now, most of our resources are in the U.S., but we are continuing to grow and develop and really getting back involved very heavily in the contract packaging manufacturing space. So thank you for having us.
All right, very good. So I guess really going to kind of make this a conversation, and as we go along, please feel free to chime in with any questions as we go along here. But first question I have for Ryan. Ryan, what type of technology advancements in transportation freight will impact the supply chain over the next few years?
There's really three that sort of stand out. Number one is data, and everybody talks about data, but the impact of data over the next couple of years is really going to be getting better and cleaner data. We have a lot of data that we're capturing right now. There's not really a lot we can do with it. It's not clean. You can't really apply a lot of machine learning to it and things like that. So we're going to see really changes in how data is captured, how it's cleaned, and then really how you can use it to make it a substantial impact. And then the other two are really anything that removes friction. So automation. The last panel is a little bit about automation. Anything that can automate a part of a workflow that just removes friction for the parties involved. I mean, historically, software has sort of been shifting burdens. The woman on the last panel talked a little bit about her vendors or her contract manufacturer's reaction of, they're just going to shift the work to us. Now we have to do it; they don't have to do it. Forward-looking sort of automation software is going to, instead of shifting the burden down line, Gene shifting it to me or me shifting it to a trucking company or what have you, really truly automating from end to end. And then the last one is one that's not talked about a lot. I mean, AI is talked about a ton. And really when people talk about AI, most of the time they talk about machine learning or like neural nets, but natural language processing. Really that's like removing friction is meeting people where they are. Natural language processing or chatbots is really about sort of like slotting in with how people want to do business and interact today. You guys all have these large systems, ERPs and TMSs that do all these different things. But at the end of the day, like how many emails are still going back and forth? Right? Like how many times do you have to pick up your cell phone and text somebody to ask them a question that's relatively simple? Yes, you have some user interface or some login that could let you go in and look up the information yourself, but it's easier to ask that other person. And so Natural language processing is one that I definitely see being really impactful in the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, very good. It's a question for Gene. How does transportation positively or negatively affect the planning process for contract manufacturers?
Well, I think it's some of both. I think there's positive and negative. I think I have a little bit of a unique perspective. As I mentioned, our business grew out of Visual Pack, who is a contract manufacturer, also has a manufacturing arm. So had the chance to see how that process flows, and I think as CPGs are doing more and more through contract manufacturing, you get a chance to see how the process actually works. And my observation has been there's an incredible amount of planning and detailed analysis of the whole manufacturing process and timing and raw materials and all these things. And transportation often comes at the end as kind of an afterthought. And it gets very siloed, and the bigger the CPG, the more complicated it is with a lot of different people, et cetera. So all the savings, they're fighting really hard for pennies oftentimes. And then it comes to the transportation, and oh, by the way, we got to get this stuff shipped. Can you help us out?
And it's the easy part.
It's
right?
the easy
like,
part, right.
So all you got to do is like have a truck show up and pick it up and go there.
No big deal.
Yeah.
So, economics matter, and there's a lot of focus on that at this conference. But I think on the trucking side, the more you can plan, the more you can get organized, the more you can align with the proper partners, the better you can help yourself. And it's such a big part of the cost when you look at the whole process. So my I guess advice would be the earlier you can get your transportation partners at the table, try to do that, because they can be very helpful with kind of the overall process, where you can save. Timing matters. Transportation is a very cyclical business throughout the year. There's different things that go on and what have you. So the more you can bring that into the planning process, I think it really helps the overall economics and can help you realize a lot of the hard work that goes.
I find myself thinking, my gosh, when I was in purchasing, I had this much to do in this amount of time. If I came to you and said, God, you do my planning for me, it would make your life easier, sure the heck make my life easier, would you do that?
I would love to.
Okay.
I would love to.
Right.
And it's starting to happen in some cases, at least from our perspective. It just doesn't happen enough. And like I said, I've had the chance to sit from a contract manufacturer kind of sister company situation. We've seen the different things come through, and it's always talked about, but it just doesn't seem to happen as often as it should.
There's a lot that goes into that too. I mean, one of the leading questions that's coming up in the future is sort of about utilization and different. We have to plan the trucks. We have to plan. Oh, I don't. Gene does, and so does Blake, and I don't have to anymore, I guess. But there's so many things that go into that. When's the freight ready? What are other people planning in and out of any of these facilities? How that impacts dwell time and things like that. And so certainly, that's one of the things that the data should help with, is what I would call decisioning. It's like planning is one thing, but decisioning and helping make the best decisions, incorporating all of these different factors that really go into what you would kind of call planning, is something that really needs to be done, just like across the industry.
And I'm sorry.
No, just from the price perspective, there's a get and a give to price, and in trucking, it sort of has come down to hey, I need another 3 cents a mile off, or 5 cents a mile off of this. Well, what's the give? There's a lot of things that, as an industry and supply chain, we can do to help with that. And I certainly think we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But there's a lot of things in there that could impact your price. You guys, a lot of times packaging comes down to, how do I get more packages on this truck to lower my cost per package? If we get to the thing about driver shortage, I have some statistics here that will kind of blow your mind in terms of asset utilization. And if we can increase asset utilization, it helps the trucking companies reduce their costs, which can really impact your. But because it's the end of the line, people don't really think about it as much as they should. Sorry.
No, that's right. And I think the other side of it is, the cost of the actual transportation, but there's increasing pressure on your customers, the retailers, et cetera. I mean, they're tightening their windows, and it's getting penalties, all that type of thing. So again, to ignore the transportation part, I think opens up a lot of risk and a lot of cost waste that happens, that I think if it was brought in earlier could really help. So it's a big deal.
Go ahead.
If you're going to answer this later, then you can just answer it later. But on the line of kind of pricing and what we can do to be better customers, better customers for the trucks, in terms of loading them quickly and different warehousing practices. Can you talk a little bit about like maybe the top 5 things that we can do in our warehouse to be better customers and keep drivers vital time at a minimum, and also how are they rating us? I know I've seen apps and things where they can pull out of a parking lot.
Yep.
Can you just give us a few things that we could do better that we're seeing?
I've talked a lot already. Somebody
Yeah,
else.
you guys
say
go
something.
ahead. Feel that. It's a good question.
Blake, go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, from our standpoint, so actually having the warehouse side of it as well, I mean, that is one thing. So the hours of service is a big concern now. So yes, the dwell times while they're at your site, how quickly can you get it loaded? Do you utilize a drop trailer program? And I think it's almost what you guys were alluding to. I mean, the more that we can plan and that we know, we can go get that material, it's ready, and can get it out, utilize our assets, because that's the biggest challenge we had too. So we also have a fleet of trucks. And so when you're trying to utilize those assets, it's about those things turning, and that's how you're going to generate the revenue. So I think planning is one, most certainly. I think also, kind of taking care of the driver. So how easy is the check-in and check-out process? I mean, when you talk about rating on the apps, that's what they're giving feedback. Is there, a decent waiting room, especially if they're going to have to be there a while? You want to get them back out. There's a lot of concern these days too about, where do they park because of their hours of service and sleep. So, can you, make sure if you get them out on time, great. But even, what we're starting to see at some larger facilities is, can you incorporate some of that stuff into your warehouse, right? So they have that ability, or can they stay there, or something like that. So it's a whole lot of things that you're looking at to basically make them feel welcome, because a lot of times the truck drivers feel like, they're second-class citizen, and that's the way the DC's treating them as well.
There's a term that goes around, and it's a shipper of choice or receiver of choice, and you would be amazed at how close-knit this community of trucking companies is, and there's a lot of them. But facilities become notorious, and it becomes difficult to get trucks that want to go there if it's not a workable scenario, whether it's hours or how they're treated or places that they can go or park trucks. So all that stuff really matters. So I think it's in each organization's best interest to try to make that as accommodating as they can, because it really works against you if you don't.
Do you have trucks?
You can negotiate, right? If you're a shipper of choice, you can use that during your negotiation.
Data is powerful here. Yeah. So, you have trucks? You guys have trucks, right?
Yep.
What's your driver turnover? Can you give me, can you give us a ballpark?
Yeah, I mean, ours is probably about 35% right now.
That's incredibly low.
Yeah, I was going to say ours is probably about the same.
So unbelievably low. The industry average for driver turnover is over 90%. Most fleets are dealing with over 100% driver turnover, right? And so trucking companies are typically operating on anywhere from over the road. Trucking companies, not LTL, can be a little bit different, but trucking companies are typically operating on operating ratios anywhere from 96 to 105.
It means drivers are moving from one company to the other?
Yes, correct. So we're talking about driver turnover is incredibly expensive. Yeah. The two biggest impacts to driver turnover are the pickup and drop off facilities that they have to go into frequently. The two things that drivers care about most at a facility: do you have parking on site? So can I take my break there? That just decreases their angst, their frustration, et cetera. And do you have a bathroom? Those are the two biggest impacts to driver turnover. If fleets can lower their driver turnover, imagine what that does to their operating ratio, right? There's just not a lot in there. They spend an incredible amount of money to keep and try and retain drivers. To answer your question, the two biggest things you can do: transparency. So don't try and put lipstick on a pig. Whatever you need is what you need, and call it what it is, and then share that in the process with your transportation partners and your vendors, and then decrease variance. And feel free to challenge me on this, but what we hear from particularly our trucking clients is, I don't care if it's 30 minutes to load or 13 hours to load. The problem for me is if it's maybe 30 minutes and maybe 13 hours, because I can't plan. So whatever you can do to decrease the variance in your supply chain, whether that's loading times, whether that's like how frequently you ship or what your sailing schedules are, anything you can do to decrease that is going to be very valuable in a pricing perspective. That's what's more valuable in a shipper of choice perspective.
Yes.
I don't know why I called on you, but yeah, I'm in charge now. Fade me in.
This is a discussion. Keep it going. This is good.
What my two things. One of my biggest problems in the industry that I work on is receiving trucks, right? Complete paperwork, COAs, bill of lading, seals, matching the manifest, all this good stuff, right?
Yeah.
I have like specific examples of guys handwriting bill seal numbers, so that's kind of tampering. So we moved on and created SOPs and things like that. But what can I do to communicate back to the carriers and say, hey, if the guy doesn't have all the paperwork, why are you sending him away? Because he's gonna get there. Now he's gonna stay in the final destination. And it doesn't matter if I put a team truck, whatever, go from Missouri to California, like record time, whatever. They show up in no time, and then they have to wait all that time there because they're missing a COA or they just pull up a seal number underneath their chair and put it on the manifest and writing it in. So what can we do to improve that?
So I'm a recovering attorney. So like just total transparency, you guys can like kick me when I'm outside. But I've got a chip. I got an 11-year chip. In the law, we a lot of talk about like who's in the best position to address that or address a situation or like avoid the loss. And I talked earlier about shifting burdens a little bit, and a lot of times, a lot of burdens are getting shifted to a truck driver. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. I need you to do this. Oh, by the way, I need you to be on time. And I need you to not get into an accident and kill a bunch of people. And so, the first question I would start with, and every supply chain is different, but are the drivers the best people to actually solve that problem, or is it getting the shipper involved, or is it getting the trucking company as a partner involved to forward on is there a way to forward on some of the paperwork, like digitize some of it, et cetera? So there's technology that can help with that, but really it's looking at it and saying like, is the driver the best person to actually do that? I mean, sure, they're in the truck and they're gonna go with it, but can the paperwork be put in the back of the truck instead of handed some of the paperwork that you need from the shipper? But you guys are the ones with the drivers.
Yeah, the thing to that is that you can't seal a truck with the paperwork.
Sure, of course, yeah.
Then the guy's gonna say, I can't cut that seal. I don't know what's inside.
Yeah, but what I would say too, as far as that specific example with the seal, I mean, I think I would be talking to whoever the supplier is as well, right? Because that truck should actually be sealed before they leave the lot, right? It shouldn't be the driver doing that. In fact, it's supposed to be the DC, right? Or the manufacturer, whatever material you're buying. So yeah, I think it's actually going back through that entire process to look where is that breakdown. And to Ryan's point, I mean, there could be ways where that DC is the one creating all that paperwork too, right? Can they ship? Can you get that early in the process, get it sent to you? Of course, the driver has to have that paperwork when they check in. At our DCs, especially our food DCs, right? We wouldn't even allow a truck to get checked in if they didn't have all the right paperwork. So I think it definitely sounds like there's some driver concerns. But at the same time, I think I would start with the beginning of the process and really understand where's that gap at, right? There's a gap somewhere.
I think the more you communicate, whether it's the shipper or your transportation company or whatever, if we allow the behavior to continue, make exceptions or whatever, it's going to continue. And I think everybody in the chain would prefer, hey, I realize this is important stuff. Don't let the guy in. I mean, if you allow it the first time, second time, third time, eventually it gets to be a habit, right? So I think the more you can just enforce whatever the rules are, I think it's going to ultimately help you.
Those are examples where technology can really actually help you, right? Like digitizing some of this and like getting people on a platform. That's those situations are really where technology can help you. It starts with, and this is the kind of stuff we work with clients on, like actually look at the process. Don't just kind of I think we have this problem. Like, break it down into a step-by-step process. Understand what everyone's supposed to do in the process. You said you developed SOPs, but look at what everyone's supposed to do in the process. I mean, that look at it holistically, and then see if there's ways in which software can help solve some of those problems as well.
Okay. Let me go one question. I'll go right back to you. So, Blake and Ryan, you touched on this a little bit. What trends have you seen in how packaging development is impacting the transportation business?
Yeah, so this is an easy question. So, no, I guess I'm going to tackle it from a couple different angles. Certainly, we're getting into a little bit more later, but I mean, e-commerce is changing everything, right? And all CPGs are kind of faced with how are we changing our packaging now? When you go through what the normal supply chain is to the retailer, it's kind of figured out. It's something that the CPGs have been doing. I think still the biggest challenge there is, though, making sure that you're utilizing the right packaging. To your point earlier, right? The carrier wants to utilize that asset as best he can. And I think the stat is still like, even now, there's still like 24% kind of error, right? Because the boxes aren't the right size or, they've been over-engineered. And then as you go to e-commerce, a lot of those boxes are 40% error, right? Because of the way you're overpacking and dunnage. So there's a tremendous cost to the CPG just on not utilizing the right packaging. And then the way it impacts the carriers is, of course, you're not utilizing that truck as best you can to get that cost per case down. And then I think, one of the things that the CPGs yourself are faced with right now, and we'll talk about a little bit more, is as we really change this whole dynamic, right? The whole supply chain has now been built to big box mixing center, get full truck loads to the retailer. Well, that's all getting blown up. Now with e-commerce, it's how do I pick that one box, get it out? So I think you're going to start to see a lot of changes in that. I think you're going to see a lot of regional fleets come into play. How do you do kind of that last mile? And then that's going to be where those, in a fulfillment operation, a box can be touched almost 20 times right before it gets to the consumer. So you got to make sure that your packaging can sustain that. You also have to make sure kind of that that out of box experience, right? That everybody's demanding now. So really, I know that's not just impacting the transportation or carrier, but it's what the CPGs are having to look at and deal with. And then from just putting on the warehousing hat for a little bit too is the more that you can right size your packaging. And we can, get standardized pallets. I know that seems like a foreign concept, but we can utilize the space better in the facility. As 3PLs, we're looking more and more at automation. So again, looking at that, how is that product packaged? Can we use automation to pick it? As e-commerce continues to grow. So it's a big discussion. That's not, one. I don't think there's one right answer, but it's something that it's going to be a challenge, I think, moving forward. So.
Okay. Question?
Yes, my question is, the drivers, I mean, they have it very tough, we have guys going from LA to San Diego to pick up a load. 9 out of 10 times they're never on time because the traffic is unpredictable. What are drivers / carriers in that industry doing to try to communicate and say, hey, I'm late, whatever, there's traffic, things, and I'm sure there's routes like that all over the country. What can we do there a little bit better?
I know there's a question on technology that's coming. I don't know if you want to handle it
There's also a
there.
question on driver shortage.
Yeah.
Which touches
You're asking all the good
Which,
questions.
I can go.
I think you
all
got
in
my
on this.
questions over here.
You need to come to my personal TED Talk so we can talk about this, like when they're not up here.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, sure.
That's an excellent question. I'm going to bounce back to Ryan and ask, so what are the challenges facing the transportation industry with visibility, which is a little bit of what you're talking about, of the freight by customers or shippers?
Yeah. So visibility number one is or with visibility, the challenges that are facing in visibility are really getting all of the information in one place so that it can be actionable. So, that was my point about data earlier. So to your point about what are they doing to let people know that they're going to be late? I mean, they're giving you a login to a user interface that you can see where the truck is. But how is traffic impacting that? The visibility or the blue dot platform. Okay, I'm going to use the blue dot analogy in a second again. The blue dot platform doesn't know when the driver is supposed to be there; it just knows where the driver is. So the second piece on visibility is what I call more than the blue dot. Where the truck is, or where the product is, let's say we're not even tracking the truck, where the product is like maybe 20% of the information you actually need. You see a truck, you see your product's been in Reno for 3 days. Is that helpful if it was supposed to be in Dayton, Ohio 5 days ago? No. Like what's helpful is why is it there? What is happening with it, right? Drivers on the side of the road between LA and San Diego. You can see that on a blue dot. Cool. Well, like, did he run out of hours? Is he stopped by the DOT? Did he get into an accident? All of those things dramatically change the outputs, right? And so getting to more than the blue dot is a huge one. Another one is being nimble enough. And both of you touched on this a little bit, and this has kind of been a topic of conversation as we've been talking about this. About a year or so ago, there was some news about like Nike and then Adidas, and Nike had built a much more nimble supply chain than Adidas had. Consumer expectations are shifting. It's the Amazon effect, and it's not so much that they are shifting permanently, it's that they are constantly shifting. So meeting the demand of the shippers and being nimble enough to do that, right? And so you were talking a little bit about these big DCs and the truckload and line hauls, but it's really actually being able to move more nimbly, to go from long haul to short haul, and you guys being able to actually act that nimbly. We're seeing the length of haul increase. It had been decreasing for a long time. We've actually seen that the length of the over the road portion is increasing as final mile providers are becoming more prevalent. The last one I've got here is liability. So I said I'm a recovering attorney. Like, liability is a huge one. I don't know if you guys have heard anything about liability as to trucking companies. But like tort reform is a must right now. I mean, these verdicts are out of hand. That impacts y'all greatly, not just because like you're going to pay a higher rate per mile, but because pretty soon plaintiffs' attorneys are going to come knocking on your door. And I'm going to tell you, as a recovering attorney, your lawyers, your in-house counsel are not the best people to protect you from that. They're going to try and contracts just shift liability. Well, these large trucking companies cannot even withstand the types of liability or the types of verdicts that are coming against them on such a regular basis. So like, all of us need to be really insightful about how we are managing our supply chains, how we're setting up drivers to drive. The last thing, I'll stop talking in a second, but a statistic I heard at this conference I was at earlier this week that I thought was really interesting. You are more likely to have a collision between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, as an example. You're more likely to have a collision. But between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m., obviously there's more trucks on the road, but between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. is when you're most likely to have the collision that is going to absolutely kill you as a business, right? So let's say you're using intermediate. Trucking company goes out of business, intermediate goes out of business. Who are they going to come after to pay against that $40 million judgment? It's going to be y'all. This is why these are difficult. There's a lot of moving parts in it, because I'm going to talk about asset utilization soon. But
Wow.
As
an attorney, that's hard to deal with.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's not so much a question, but a comment that I'm finding interesting listening to this. So I'm coming out of the education side, so I'm working with students in the university, and I teach myself, and I'm looking at what you're talking about, and I made some notes here. So when you talk about trucker comfort, I can tell you when I look at the textbooks and everything else in universities, we're teaching, we don't want those folks in the building because it's a risk liability and theft and everything else. And so the message isn't getting there that would make life easier. The other one was the packaging. I found myself thinking, back to the textbooks, we look to the engineer to design that, but nowhere I can't remember anywhere in 15 years we've ever said, we got to get the trucking company in here. That I find myself wondering, are these problems ever going to get solved if we don't get you connecting with the universities to say, let's
bring them to the table. You said that earlier.
No, that's exactly what has to happen, and it's systematic, and I think it's going to need to change as the supply chain is changing.
There's competing priorities. Like there is a huge liability of having them on the dock. Then again, the way that the rules for cargo insurance or cargo liability are in the federal regulations, right? A driver signs off on whether he or she accepts the product as loaded. Well, I couldn't watch it be loaded. They wouldn't let me sign shipper load and count. But right, so like now there's a conflict here, and now I have a claim. So how do we? And certainly, like, it makes sense to potentially not let a driver on the dock.
Yeah,
So
how do you break that cycle? Because
we all have to be at the table
student
together.
doesn't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Right,
I'm
right.
happy to come talk to you. So is Gene. Gene loves it.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, on top of the colleague there saying about the education, more and more I come across, young packaging engineers and they don't know the law at all of how many pounds can go outside. So first class I give, to them is listen, it's a rule of thumb, it's 88,000 pounds, 44 for the load, 44 for the trailer. Just design so we maximize that, volume, because it's the same. A 53-footer will only fit a certain number of pallets, and if you have a 2,000 pound, you can't really double stack it, do it, all this stuff. So it's very straightforward. It's just that I'm not sure if there's a disconnect somehow, or people just learn that because they hang out with the logistics guy that's actually loading all the trucks. So there is some sort of gap.
No, I agree. I agree. And also how you load the truck, right? It's
Yeah.
44,000
Yeah, right.
pounds. You gotta be careful how you load that truck.
I've had 20,000 pound loads that were over axle. Like, cool. It's only 20,000 pounds, but I have 30,000 pounds on my drive axle. So like, now what? Well, it's only 20,000 pounds.
A question for Gene. So Gene, what are digital freight brokers? What's their future?
I love this question. So quick show of hands. Since you've been in San Antonio, has anybody used Uber, Lyft? Just about everybody. And I think oftentimes when this question comes up, that's sort of how people kind of think about it, is the digital freight broker, is everything's going to be an app. Really don't need any of us or anybody else in the transportation business. It's going to be all app controlled. And technology is awesome. I mean, Ryan's an expert in this, and it's helping the industry. There's so much that can happen. But it's so far from being practical that somebody's going to manage a billion-dollar transportation network on an app. It's just not functional. You work with different carriers, different partners, et cetera. Everybody's got their own take on this. I'm going to give you a quick parallel. So I grew up early in my career in the wireless telephone business. If you remember back, late 80s, early 90s, car phones were new. Big box in the trunk, and you had the antenna on the window, and the car phone, that was a big deal. And every city had two carriers. There was a Bell Company and Cellular One or US Cellular, names that aren't around, a lot of them anymore. But there was such a fight for technology, they couldn't agree on a platform. So they were fighting different ways, different digital stuff, and different ways that they could do it. And they wouldn't, no one would bend their perspective. So the industry couldn't morph, and it couldn't really develop and leverage the scale. And I think many cases, that's very similar to what's going on right now in this industry, is that there's some very, very cool technology, but it doesn't really talk to each other. Everybody's fighting over standards of which one do you want to use as a shipper. I can't look at 10 different apps or whatever the story is. So I think there's going to be a drive, there needs to be a drive to start agreeing on some standards that everybody can build towards. And rather than try to everybody create their own little kingdom, there's going to have to be a sharing type of an attitude, I think. And if we can do that, and then all the smart people and all the great technology that's out there can start to be utilized in a way that actually helps a lot of the things that we're talking about here. Technology is an awesome tool, but transportation is just fraught with failure. It just is. And we're not going to change it. Trucks break down. Drivers get sick. Drivers, leave, switch companies. Well,
Spend 3 days in Reno.
Yeah, whatever the story may be. And you need problem-solving, active participation to help manage that process. Technology can be a tool. It can make us more efficient, more effective. The information can get to places where you can actually do something with it. But you're not going to eliminate, the people part of this business anytime soon that I can see. And I think that's a really important part. You got to pick the right partners. I mean, I think that's a big deal. There's a lot of trucking companies out there. Talk about that in a little bit. But find the right partners. Use technology as your friend, because it really can be. But I think there has to be some industry maturing to really take full advantage of what's out there, because it can be phenomenal. But it's not a cure-all. And it's just, I don't think it's going to be anytime soon.
All right, great. Now, a question for Blake. You touched on this a few minutes ago. What are with the changing marketplace of retail, from DC stores to e-com, how does this impact the transportation logistics industry?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing, some of my own opinions too, is kind of what I alluded to a little bit earlier, as I do see, and if you look at even reports from CBRE, right, that the DC size is changing. More companies are looking for like the 120,000 square foot sites. They're going to look at do more of them and in the market that they need to be. So with kind of the e-com and the brick and mortar going away, that's what we're seeing is they want the DC to be closer in the market. I think there's going to be a lot of regional fleets that kind of pop up from that. The last mile, I know we've mentioned it a couple times, but the last mile is really becoming that kind of focus, which is and the last mile is inherently a challenging market anyway. So especially if you start talking big and bulky things of that nature, that's an industry that is very unusual. It's all basically contract drivers, but they're coming in your home and things of that nature. So what I see changing is it's just a complete deviation, really, from what we've been trained to do. Right, the whole supply chain to this point has always been taking miles off the road, bigger boxes, full truckload, palletize it so you don't have to touch it. Now it's going to each. I got to send one item to one person every day. So I think it's just going to change really the whole landscape. We as an industry are going to have to start dealing with that, right? We're not just going to go abandoning our big boxes, but we got to figure out how we utilize them better. And I think when you kind of, the term omnichannel always gets thrown around a lot, but what I see is inside the DC is going to be an omnichannel environment. So inside that space, you're going to have your, packaging or late stage differentiation, so you can, pick that. You're really going to treat kind of a fulfillment e-com order almost as like co-pack, right? I mean, you're basically customizing that. Goes back to the packaging, right? How can we use companies like either Pack Size or others so that, you're almost making that box on demand too, so you're not having that, extra dunnage. So a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with our customers looking at dim weights, right? How do we save on that, make sure that we're not, have a box that is 3 times bigger than it needs to be. So, I mean, there's just a lot of that changing that I think we're going to have to address, as we go forward. So.
Very good. So, Ryan, you touched on this a little bit ago, but how's the transportation freight industry preparing driver supply versus demand, and the type of drivers?
So there's a ton of talk about a driver shortage, and I am out here to evangelize the message that we don't have a driver shortage. What we have is a driver utilization problem. I mean, we have problems inside the truck and how much of the space we're using in the trailer. But realistically, there is an unbelievable amount of waste in how drivers are actually used. So as an example, I'll take traffic. Traffic has the equivalent impact in a year of taking 1 out of every 6 drivers off the road entirely. E-commerce is making this worse because there are more vehicles on the road because we have to make these final mile deliveries. 1 in every 6 trucks. There are 3.5 million Class 8 trucks on the road. So just do the math. Every single day, that's 16 shipments. That's 1 out of every. Imagine just taking 1 out of every 6 trucks out of your supply chain. Obviously you can't really do anything about traffic. That's not something you guys can control. But 4.5 hours a day, drivers are wasting between loading, unloading, and looking for parking, right? 4.5 hours of their 11.5 hours of of their 11 hours of driving, right? That's the equivalent of 1.4 million drivers every single day being taken off the road. A third of trucks are take a third of the trucks off the road. If we can get incremental improvement there, it's going to be unbelievably powerful in terms of and now imagine what that does for your rates, right? Carriers have to make a certain amount of money to cover their fixed and their variable costs. So if you can do things to offer parking or have parking closely, you need to communicate that back to the carriers. That goes with some of these apps and these rating platforms. Doc411 is a company that has exactly this type of community for drivers. But that goes to the variability and the predictability point. And these are really difficult these are difficult. We were talking earlier about sort of all of the variables in play, right? We can decrease traffic by shipping overnight, but then you're more likely to get an accident that's going to cause an unbelievable amount amount of damage and liability. So complicated problems, but we need to be really, really insightful about where are we wasting these resources. Again, it doesn't matter if it's 13 hours to load. If we communicate that and carriers can plan appropriately, we can increase that utilization and really decrease costs for everybody.
So Ryan, do you know what percentage out there, I guess a holistic percentage here, are drop and hook versus live load unload? And is that, in what direction is it going?
So it's going more towards drop and hook. I think it's something like 60+% of shipments are drop and hook. To me, that's not a sustainable model either. We're going to go down a path of like, how do we bring an end to what I call bring your own trailer, right? A carrier or a driver has to affirmatively opt into a type of equipment. You talked about Uber and Lyft. The reason Uber and Lyft in the ride share space really were able to disrupt, which is a word I actually don't like, even though it's not like shake your fist at it. It's because I work in technology. They brought net new capacity. You in your car could drive. You can't do that with trucks. But bring an end to bring your own trailer could really do that. So now it's just shifting a burden down, right? Now we just have all of these trailers just sitting everywhere. It's another fixed cost. And not being ready on time, all of these other things that go along with visibility still really impact that. That 4.5 hour number comes from a number of different sources. I would encourage everybody in this point to look at, JB Hunt has a white paper called 660 Minutes, which really breaks down, right? They don't really do live load and unload. So it's primarily, it's moving that direction, but it's going to need to move the other direction because it's incredibly expensive to have drop and hook operations too.
Okay. Yes.
I mean, clearly you guys are experts. Do you guys know if government, the country, or anybody here is doing anything to address like increasing the size of the roads, or making? I know that in New Jersey there's like on the New Jersey Turnpike there's a side just dedicated for trucks and certain amount of pounds. Do you guys know if there's any program to look at the whole thing and say, hey, you know what? Maybe if we can channel these things, we can help to prevent some of the drivers staying so long behind the wheel and
Sure.
the amount of miles a day, etc.
There's various infrastructure things that are out there. I think one of the big things, I know what Ryan's saying. I disagree a little bit on the driver piece. Having an asset company on our own, trying to find drivers, et cetera, it is frickin' hard. It's really hard. And while you look at the whole, maybe there's enough if they're properly utilized. In various areas, it's sort of hard to figure that out. One of the realities for truck drivers is you can't drive until you're 21, and you have to have 2 years of experience before you can get behind the wheel. So you're already at 23 or what have you. Anybody that's coming out of high school, you can be a great career. You can make great money, but the 18, 19, 20, that's not allowed.
They're getting into
currently.
something else, yeah.
So they're whatever, it's trades or whatnot. So there's a lot of discussion about looking at that, and I think that's going to be necessary, quite frankly, to really kind of alleviate some of the issues, because it's a big problem, and those things. So there's some regulation I think that can change, that can really open the door to some of this. Infrastructure is a part of it, but I'm not familiar if the road part is really part of that equation. I don't know if you guys know any more.
Yeah, I mean, I know there is legislation right now that they're looking at, because if you do look at our infrastructure, I mean, it is, challenged in some areas, to your point, right? If you're sitting in traffic, it's election year, so it probably won't go anywhere. But, but no, I do know, I don't know the actual, law or whatever that's there, but I do know there is some infrastructure discussions going on.
Just quickly, how many people have a positive opinion of truck drivers? That's good. Most people don't. And legislators are the same way. So like anything that comes across, most legislation that comes across is it actually has the impact of how do we make drivers' lives worse. So like, for the instance, any tolls, we want to increase tolls. Let's increase tolls on truck drivers. Like, let's actually make it harder and worse for them to get around. It's the exact opposite of what you're talking about, is what happens the most commonly. Would you guys agree? Is that what you guys see too?
Yeah, that's part of the legislation too, is looking at the tolls and how do they do that on trucks. But, we just need Burt Reynolds back, right? So everybody likes truck drivers again.
Yeah.
Can
You haven't heard enough of my voice yet? You want?
Well, it's for
Okay.
anybody, but is it a fair statement that the decline of the owner-operator has had a greater impact on overall capacity?
Like the independent contractor laws, you mean, or?
Well, just the fact that it's very difficult to own your own truck and with all the regulations now, the restriction on, the hours of service that have been implemented over the last 10 years.
I think there's a lot of reality to that. I mean, it's a hard business. It's a hard business for a small guy. There's a lot of factors. There's a question coming up, I think, that'll be a little bit more specific to this. But things like insurance, what's going on, some of these nuclear verdicts. I mean, insurance rates. Again, asset group here, but 20, 30, 40% increases in a lot of cases. That's not sustainable.
We have clients who've had 150% increases.
It's crazy.
That aren't self-insured. Yeah,
So I mean, it's all about, it's raising the cost to get trucks around, which filters through to everybody. So I think there's a lot of moving parts. It's not any one thing, but when you start putting all this together, the reality is we all need trucks. I mean, we need trucks to be able to operate our various businesses. So whatever the circumstances are, we're going to need to adapt, and it's going to force some change. It really is, behavior-wise.
So this one's for you, Gene, kind of relevant to today, what we're hearing today in the news. But how do you feel the coronavirus what kind of effect do you think it'll have on the transportation industry, supply chain in general?
Well, I'm sort of chuckling a little bit, not that it's funny, but when we kind of came up with these questions a few weeks ago, and it was sort of like, I don't know, maybe it's something we should talk about, who knows? And now it's like, it's every place. I'm not a medical expert, so I can't tell you what the real deal. It seems like a bad flu to me, but the reality is that it's causing massive change, massive behavior change. I mean, there's a few stats. So from containers coming into the country, coming into LA is probably the busiest port. I mean, they're down by over 30% currently, so stuff's not coming. When you look at ships, they've canceled something like 60 or 70 ships coming in, to this country. So, and it's hundreds of thousands of containers coming in, just aren't here. And this comes on the tail end of the Chinese New Year, which companies plan for. We're going to be down for a couple of weeks or whatever. So it just kind of went right through that. So I don't believe we've really felt the impact yet. It's coming, though. I mean, it's coming. I mean, I've not seen a lot of things. I'm going to the store, can't get stuff because it's tied up, with this whole situation. So I don't, again, I don't know where it's going to go. I think we're at the very, very beginning of it for what's going to affect transportation. Take the, the medical side out of it. It's going to have a major impact. And still only 30 to 40% of the Chinese companies are back up and operating. A lot of them haven't even got to that spot. So it's going to take 3, 4, 5 months to get that channel back up and going. And I think it's going to force, we were talking earlier, a lot of companies rethink some of their supply chain stuff, is that there's so much concentrated. One thing goes, something like this comes up, you're stuck, So I think everyone needs to prepare for what's coming, because there's going to be a pendulum. Right now it's going to be a shortage. And then when things kind of get better, we're going to see the other side of it, which is going to be now massive volume coming into the country. The ports won't be able to handle it, truck capacity, all that stuff. So there's going to be a yin and a yang to this that I think is going to be really substantial. So hopefully the disease itself is under control and things take care of themselves. Obviously a really serious thing, but it's going to have a massive effect on the supply chain for the next, I think 4 to 6 months. So everyone should be super aware and plan for it as best you can.
I think we're hoping to end the conference on a little higher note, but some of this stuff, appreciate the honesty, though, but it's reality. Yes, Jim.
I think I have one question, and I don't know if you can talk to it, but what do you see as the impact to using driverless trucks in convoys versus using rail? Is that cannibalistic in nature, or is it hitting a different pitch?
Go get them.
I can make it up, but
I have strong opinions on everything.
yeah, I mean, that's something that as a carrier salesman, you're always exploring that new technology. My personal opinion, I think it's just there's still development that has to happen, right, for that. And from a rail standpoint, really and truly that the rail just goes up and down based on the fuel price anyways. I mean, that's usually what drives you to rail is, when diesel's high, you push the rail. And what I'm seeing too, from a rail standpoint, if just from an infrastructure standpoint, a lot of the new DCs, right, they're not being rail served. So, it's becoming harder to find it, and it's kind of more like a specialized thing to actually have rail served facilities. So, I mean, to me, on the driverless truck thing, it's still kind of out there. I don't know, how much further that is down the road. Certainly, technology is developing rapidly. But I don't know, Ryan, you might be better than that than me. But.
So the interesting thing, so I'm super bullish on autonomous vehicles just somewhat generally. Like humans are really bad at lots of things. One of the things we're bad at is managing multiple variables, which is what driving is. And so like we are awful at driving, but then of course like it gets sensationalized when some sort of autonomous vehicle has a collision, even though they're like already 95% better than humans. However, it's an interesting problem because you have a commercial space which needs to adapt or adopt, and there's an interesting like tricky point here, which is drivers are finicky, right? And so like imagine if you guys put out a press release that says, hey, we're going to pilot some autonomous trucks. What would your drivers do? Your driver turnover would go from 35% to infinite percent. You would absolutely you'd be stuck. So somebody's gonna have to make a big bet on it, like in the commercial space. I mean, money is pouring into it. Waymo raised $4.5 billion yesterday on some crazy valuation, which is awesome in my opinion. I mean, and CMVs have gotten much safer. I mean, we have like 1.8 in fatalities per million miles driven at this point. It's unbelievable. They're very, very safe at this point, but still tragic. I think the two most likely scenarios you're going to see going forward are either drones. I mean, 5G cuts latency by like 1,000% or something, which makes maybe like using offshore or nearshore labor to drone pilot trucks potential. And I know this all seems like really pie in the sky, but there's people working on this. The other, and actually probably the most likely that I think you'll see in the next 2 or 3 years, because I know companies that are pretty far down the road on working on it, are a hub and spoke. So the long haul or the over the road portion will be done by an autonomous or platoons. So Peloton is a company who's working on that with a driver in the front and a driver in the back and then trailers in the middle. There's ones that are working on entirely autonomous in platoons. And then what does it look like to have, an area outside of Phoenix, an area outside of the Metroplex, an area outside of Chicago that are right off the, the arterial interstates where they go, and then drivers will do the local. It's really interesting, especially because like one of the things that probably keeps your driver turnover relatively low is drivers are home more frequently, right? So the over the road is where it's really, really hard to get the drivers. Whether it'll cannibalize intermodal or rail, probably. Rail service has gotten much, much better and much more comparable to over the road. But like when you're able to ship more and more quickly, because there won't be limitations on hours of service, I think intermodal will definitely suffer.
All right, this has been a great discussion. We have 3 minutes left, so just kind of go down the line here, starting with Blake. What are the top 3 challenges that face the transportation freight industry over the next 5 years?
Yeah, so we've really touched on all of them. And if you look at it, and I've talked to our transportation team, driver shortages, certainly, I mean, I know, Ryan, I agree with you, we've got to do better utilization, but driver shortage is a concern. For us, we are fortunate that our fleet is such a way that, we don't have as much turnover, but they are aging. I think the stat is like over 57% of the drivers now are 45 years or older. So to your point, I mean, just with the attrition and going, I mean, if you look at the, some of the stats are, it could be 105,000, short by 2023. But again, I think it's how we utilize it and how we manage through that. I think, the infrastructure is a concern. So when you look at hours of service, how do we manage against that? And then 2, just the government regulations in general, right? I mean, ELT's coming on board. There's more drug testing coming on. Now, just like we talked about yesterday with one of the speakers, when we were talking about or the panel with CBD, right? There's rules and regulations there. And now there's states that legalize marijuana. So there, if you start testing those drivers, chances are you're going to have more fallout. So there's some concerns too with the rules and regulations that are coming down.
Very good. Gene?
I think the driver piece is, don't want to be redundant, but I think that's a factor, and how that plays in. I think that's something we're all gonna be dealing with. I think a little bit of this I would call philosophy, maybe, is that the transportation network and everything that goes into it is substantially changing because of e-commerce, because of just the way that this industry and the business and technology are all evolving. And I think there has to be a sense of cooperation between shippers, CPGs, carriers, whether it's asset or brokerage, whatever. Everybody's in the same situation, and we all need to work together. And good partners is a big deal. One of the things that drives me nuts every year is the annual bid process, because I get it. Everybody's trying to get the best cost or whatever, but you get routing guides and you follow them, and as soon as rates go up, the drivers don't want to go there. So there's a lot of stuff to that I think just how do we manage that process a little bit more effectively? And I also worry about whether it's governmental regulation or some of these insurance things. There's some real costs that are going on that are going to take the price of transportation up no matter what. And I think we got to be very aware. And we need the companies. We need trucking companies to make money, because if they're not here, we got a problem. Quick stat: there's roughly 500,000 trucking companies that are out there. 92% of them 6 trucks or less. I mean, it's a staggering number when you think about it. We need those guys to be successful, and we all kind of share part of the burden. So there's challenges coming up, but it's going to be fun.
I've said a lot, and so the only thing I'm going to just plus one your philosophy or mentality. That was actually going to be my answer. So it was interesting hearing you say that. I think changing our mentality from we've always done it this way is definitely the number one challenge. So that goes to collaboration. It goes to opening our minds to trying new things. And certainly I've said some pretty off the wall stuff for probably most of you. But I think that's the number one challenge. Absolutely.
All right, terrific. Any other questions from the group here? Of course. Last one. All right.
Let's get this man a chair.
From a technology perspective, have you guys seen anything electric, trailers to
Yes.
stuff? I mean, is it on the works?
Trailers that drive themselves?
No,
Because those exist.
no diesel.
Yes.
Just electrical
Yeah.
plug-in. Is that on the works?
Yeah.
I mean, you guys don't.
There's ones already in service.
Oh, wow.
It's coming. Yeah.
Drayage is the first use case where you're seeing a lot of it. So there's I just saw an article the other day in the Port of LA. There's drivers that are using it a lot because there's a lot of long wait time. So the impact on pollution there, but also when you're sitting in a truck and the engine's idling, it bounces a lot, and there's driver health implications. And so they did a study on the electric vehicles and how it improved driver health. So they're already in service. They're also in service on long haul. That's gonna the range is not quite where it needs to be to really maximize.
Hybrid, I mean, we can start there.
Yeah. So, but those are definitely already in service. Do you guys have any?
We don't have any.
You didn't pre-order the Tesla trucks?
No, we did not
A couple
pre-order.
years ago. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you to Gene, Ryan, and Blake for your time and sharing your
everybody.
thoughts. So thank you
Thanks,
very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for staying.
Well done, sir.
Yeah, you too.
Nice job, man.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
You're going to give that to Cole in the back. Okay, we're going to be winding down. Of course, we're going to be sending out surveys. Before we move on, I just want to ask Steve if you wanted to come up and share some additional thoughts.
Yeah, sure. All right, so clearly now we can have roundtables for the rest of the conference because we're down a little bit. But I hope the last few days were, again, really eye-opening, mind-opening, uncomfortable for you guys in the room. Again, I hope for those who were here for the first time that it was also very worthwhile, relevant, and something that we'll follow up with as a board, so don't be surprised if either Don or Dave or somebody from the board actually reaches out to you guys and just tries to get your opinions besides just the survey. But again, we're in existence. We matter only because we're, as an organization, adding value to you and to your companies and everything. So please share with us if there were things that happened that you didn't like, or other things that for Chicago that we can do to either get particular speakers, topics that build on, right, the different pillars in the supply chain that would be really relevant to you. Again, we try to stay at the cutting edge. We've talked labor before at the last conference in Minnesota. Now we talk transportation, right? We've had everybody from Google and Foxconn and others come speak. We've done automotive before. We'll have DHL, right, and Method as tours. I think the Toyota tour, just wow, right? I mean, absolutely incredible. And so we'll keep trying to do those things because it's really getting us out of our comfort zone, seeing things that we don't see in our day-to-day job that we can try to apply. So if I go back, again, change clearly is what we're facing. It's at a really rapid pace, and hopefully for all of us, these last couple of days just give us a chance to pause, think a little bit, and go apply it back into our companies to make them better, have better capabilities, remove some inefficiencies, and at the end of the day, that's what we're all about, is trying to drive more value to the industry. So thank you guys for truly your insights. Again, remember, if you're unsure of how to do something, think F4SS, because either we probably have a tool that we created already. We have an initiative team that might be working on the topic that you can join and participate in. We might have members or just people you can connect with, advisory, right, members, technology people, or you can actually talk to your competition, which is just one of the rarest things that I've ever seen, is you can reach out to somebody and just say, hey, I've got this problem. Did you guys have this as well, and how do you solve it, right? Or how can you get after it? So that's really what we're all about. That's why we exist. So again, thank you. Get home safely, and we look forward to talking with you well before October 5th. But at worst, we look forward to seeing you October 5th to 7th. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Steve. So just some reminders, we will be sending out today's survey, and then we will do an overall survey, just asking for your thoughts and input. I want to say that, and a reminder, leave your name tags that you still have either on your chair, or there's a box outside on the table to leave that. There is lunch for those of you who aren't running and still are going to have a little time before you travel. Lunch will be served down in Chula Vista, so you can do that. I want to thank our speakers. I think they all did a great job, and we appreciate the time they put in. I want to thank our board. Our board spent a lot of time with our speakers for this. They spent time getting to know our speakers, introducing them, facilitating the sessions, and I think they did a great job, and we appreciate their support. And thank you all for coming. We hope it was of value to you, and that you have a desire to learn more and to grow more personally and professionally through this experience. And we'll see you in Chicago in October. Have safe travels.